there is a custom that is prevalent throughout the Jewish world of a transaction between a group of rabbis on one side, representing their communities, and a non-Jew, whereby the rabbis sell on behalf of their community's chametz, leavened bread, for the non-Jew. And what occurs is Jews, in the weeks preceding Pesach, go to a rabbi and they assign their rabbi to be their agent for the selling of chametz. That itself is an interesting transaction in its own right, where many different things happen in terms of appointing that agency. And we'll get back to that in a sec. Then the rabbi, maybe one rabbi in a community, might be a few rabbis getting together, have a non-Jew, they meet with a non-Jew early in the morning or in the morning prior to Pesach, when it's still possible for a Jew to conduct a transaction in chametz, and for them to sell on behalf of the community all the chametz in the community. And that also follows a certain procedure. And thereby, Jews do no longer own chametz on Pesach, because it is forbidden for Jews to own chametz on Pesach. And many people see this transaction and they look at it and say, what's going on over here? It seems to be just a play, right? Because the chametz stays in the Jewish homes, and right after Pesach, the rabbis meet with the non-Jew the night right after Pesach, and the non-Jew just sells the chametz right back to the rabbis, so that what happens is the Jews put aside their chametz for the days of Pesach, they just get it back. Yet, it's a legal transaction, and thereby, Jews are not deemed, the people who are involved in that transaction, are deemed not to violate the laws of Bayirah or Bayimatzah, of owning chametz on Pesach. And this is something we have to look at. Let's go through the parts of the transaction as it moves forward. The first part is that Jews meet with their rabbi to appoint their rabbi to sell their chametz. It's funny how people talk about it. They go to the rabbi to sell the chametz. The rabbi is not buying the chametz. The rabbi is being approached to sell the chametz at its appropriate time to a non-Jew. Now, how is that done? Well, really, all you need to do is just like as with all agency. Just a person says, listen, I want you to sell my product for me, like any other agent. But because there's so many issues, like to really make it clear to people that this is a legal transaction, we do many, many different, what are called kinyanim, different acts of acquisition, to clarify and to ensure that everyone knows that this is a legal transaction. So what occurs? What happens is that usually people fill out a star. They actually sign a document saying, I appoint the rabbi to be my agent. That's a star, and that's in writing. That's one form of transaction. Another thing that people do is what's called a kinyan sudar, which is translated as a handkerchief transaction, but really what it is a kinyan chalip, and it's a certain form of transaction where one person gives another person an object, and by transferring the object to the other person, the second person transfers a right back to them. So what happens is the rabbi usually gives an object over to the person who's appointing him, and the person in doing that says, I give you back my appointment of agency. And then the object is returned to the person who originally owned it. That was used to be done with a handkerchief. Now a lot of people do it with a pen or any object that's owned by one person who gives to the other person. Another aspect is kinyan kesef, with money to verify the acquisition of the agency, and people often give the rabbi funds. And in that regard, rabbis do one of two things. Many rabbis, and this is kind of sad, but certain sadness is that many congregations, when they hire the rabbi, say, and you're going to get paid, you're going to get a certain amount of money when you do your chametz thing. And they actually consider that in the negotiations of salaries with rabbis. So that's actually perceived by the rabbi and by the congregation as part of their income. Other rabbis who don't want to be sort of involved in getting tips or whatever, what they do is they have a discretionary fund that they use for mitzvah purposes. And what they will do is any funds that they receive in this regard, they'll put into their discretionary fund. But really, the funds belong to the rabbi in the appointment of agency. So that's three forms of it. Other people do it, and is also some people, shake hands. Okay, a man comes to you and wants to appoint you as an agent. Some rabbis just shake hands, because that in our society is also seen to be some form of a sign of a transaction. These things are all done to ensure that people recognize that this is a legal transaction, and you are appointing the rabbi to be your legal agent to sell your chametz. And then the rabbi, as I mentioned, on the morning of Erev Pesach, will meet with a non-Jew and go through a variety of other transactions. Because what occurs is you don't just sell the chametz to non-Jew. You also have to rent the non-Jew the premises upon which there are the chametzes, because there's a problem with a Jew holding chametz for a non-Jew on his property, on the Jewish property. There's actually a problem with that. There's a problem with the Jew accepting any type of responsibility for that chametz. So it has to be clear to the non-Jew: I'm not responsible. The Jews are not going to be responsible for the chametz. It's your chametz, and we are going to rent you the space where the chametz is, because it should not be a Jewish space. It should be the non-Jewish space, and it's a full legal transaction. In fact, there was once a case where the Shari Tshuva in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Siman that deals with this issue, in Shulchan Aruch, which is in Orach Chaim 448, Sif 3, paragraph 3. That's the basic number of the Shulchan Aruch. There's a Shari Tshuva that actually brings down the issues where there was once a situation where an individual, the non-Jew who bought the chametz, now included in that chametz is alcohol. So this non-Jew knew that the certain Jew had a nice collection, nice liquor collection of some of the finest stuff. So what happened was, this non-Jew used to go, every day and say, I want my liquor. Okay, so the Jew says, so your liquor. Now let me explain how this works. What occurs is, when it's sold to the non-Jew has to give a deposit with an agreement that there will be, that the balance will be paid after Pesach. Usually the day after Pesach is the agreement. We accept the deposit today, Erev Pesach, and 9 days from now you have to pay the balance. After there's an evaluation of the chametz, and there's agreement that there'll be a professional evaluation of the chametz to determine the final value for it to be bought, if the person will continue paying through to the transaction. So, but technically, the transaction occurs right when the deposit is paid. That's part of the transaction. That's an aspect of the transaction, a kinyan kesed. There has to be a transfer of money. That's one of the forms of the transaction between the Jew and the non-Jew. So this non-Jew who really enjoyed the liquor, his liquor, he came and said he wanted his liquor. But the Jew knew that this non-Jew didn't have the money to pay for the liquor. The non-Jew really didn't have the money for it. And therefore the Jew knew eventually the non-Jew would not be able to meet the full transaction, and he was wondering what to do. So he went to his rabbi and said, Rabbi, I got a problem. The non-Jew is drinking this expensive liquor. I'm concerned he's going to invite his friends over to drink this expensive liquor. And I know at the end of the day, when it comes the time to evaluate the transaction, they'll say, I don't have the money for it. What can I do? So the Shari Tshuva brings down one answer of a rabbi. I heard this. Seems to have happened a couple times, but one rabbi said, I'm not sure what to do. But then what this rabbi did is he knew the non-Jew in question, and he paid the non-Jew. He gave the non-Jew a letter and said, listen, I need you to go to such and such a city to deliver this letter. And what happened was, he paid the non-Jew to go and deliver this letter at another city, and with the full knowledge that it would take enough time for Pesach to be finished before he would be able to return back to the city. And that was the way this rabbi practically worked out the problem. But the fact is, it's a real transaction. The non-Jew gives a deposit. The non-Jew actually signs a document. The non-Jew, we talked about Kinyan Klipin, that's done as well, a handshake. And there's also the concept that with the rental of the property, there's a transaction called a Kinyan Agav, that you get the stuff on the property, a whole variety of details to ensure that the transaction is legal, halachically legal, and also legal pursuant to the laws of the country. And there was actually an interesting issue that I read where there was a question about what about sales tax, what about registry in terms of land transfer registries, which have to be done according to the laws of the country. And there was a court case, I think it was decided in the United States, that says yes. However, these type of transactions, which actually serve a religious purpose, are actually exempt from these laws. Therefore, but they will be recognized by the law of the country. Anyways, but it's a real transaction. So the point is that because it's a real transaction, the non-Jew owns the property, and the Jew does not own the property, and therefore it's no longer the Jew's property, and he doesn't own chametz on Pesach. But some people say it's just a game. Come on, the Jew keeps the chametz. If the Torah wants you to get rid of the chametz, go and burn it. And the truth is destroying chametz is a prime way of getting rid of the chametz. The fact is that this idea that you can give it to a non-Jew is actually based on the Tosefta. And the understanding of the Tosefta is actually, interestingly enough, in recognition that the law needs sometimes to be circumvented. The case in the Tosefta is a Jew and a non-Jew who are going on a sea voyage in a boat for a good amount of time. And what occurs is the Jew will be away over Pesach. He's going to leave a few days before Pesach, and he's going to be in the boat after Pesach. He has to take food along because he needs food for his voyage. And lo and behold, he has a problem because he can't bring chametz. He can't own chametz. So the Tosefta talks about a case where a person says to a non-Jew who's traveling with him and saying, you know something. You're going to take 100 loaves of bread. Take 200 loaves of bread. Take 100 for me as well. Okay. In other words, it will be your bread, and I believe after Pesach, I'll for sure be interested in buying those 100 loaves of bread. It's very clear that the Jew has in mind that he has to have that bread after Pesach, but the Tosefta says it's totally okay. This classic idea that we sell our chametz before to non-Jews, it arose in the Middle Ages. This custom of doing it on a regular basis. This arose in the Middle Ages. Why? Because Jews were involved in the making of spirits. Do you ever see how long you have to have a good bottle of whiskey? Was it 10 years, 12 years? If you couldn't hold the whiskey on Pesach, you wouldn't be able to be in the business. So the fact emerged that Jews had to figure out some way to sort of deal with the laws of Pesach and yet go on. And you know what the final thing is? There's a concept in Halacha that says the Torah makmidim Moshe amamona Yisrael. The Torah is concerned about the money of the Jewish people. Waste is not a good thing. If you happen to have, food, right, and it's a good amount of food, you're just going to destroy it before Pesach. It's tremendous waste. So what occurs is that there's a recognition of values going on here. But on the other hand, there is a Torah command: don't own chametz on Pesach. Destroy it before Pesach. What does that mean? Make sure you don't have any chametz in your possession on Pesach. And here the Torah is presenting a remarkable concept that is so basic to the halachic process. Halacha deals with actual definitions, legal definitions. It deals with concepts and structure. The Torah says, don't own chametz on Pesach. That's a legal definition. Law is fundamental to Torah. We are a legal entity. In the world, in the halacha, there's so many fascinating, interesting issues. Halacha, but what defines something as kosher or not kosher? It's the law. And there's certain situations, halacha, people say, how can that be? Come on, That can't be it. That can't be right, because after all, there's got to be some source of non-kosher there. For example, if you have 3 pieces of meat, doraisa, according to biblical law, 3 pieces of meat, 2 are kosher and 1 is not, then, then because of the laws of bittul rov, because the majority rules, all 3 are kosher. You can't eat them together, you can't cook them together, but there are commentators that say you can eat the 3 pieces. But one of them is kosher? No. The law, the Torah law, overrides. If the Torah law states that this is kosher, then that is kosher. Even though in reality you might say, well, I know one of them has to be not kosher. Sorry, the law reigns supreme. There's a statement in Drashas Haran. It says that if Sanhedrin happens to make a mistake and declares something not kosher to be kosher, you don't have to be worried about eating it. Because what the Sanhedrin tells you to do is what the Torah wants you to do. Because the Torah understands that the halachic process has to work within the national structure of a legal entity of the nation, the legal structure of the nation. And therefore, what happens is we want to make sure the transaction is extremely, extremely legal. That's why there are so many concerns in the transaction itself. The appointment of the agency is legal. Make sure it's legal. We do all these different ways of forming a legal entity. We make sure the transaction with the non-Jew is legal. But the Torah law is, we don't want you to own chametz on Pesach, al pi halacha. And if you don't do that, you're abiding by the Torah law, because that's the Torah's objective. And in a certain way, right there at the essence of Pesach, we understand that the commitment of Pesach is the commitment to Torah and the commitment to the halacha. Therefore, what I find with people, and by the way, when you sell your chametz on Erev Pesach, it's also considered to be a fulfillment of the mitzvah tashbisu. You have done an act, tashbisu, destroying your chametz. You've done an act to ensure that you don't want this chametz on Pesach. The fact is you make a statement. The way you do it is either by burning it, or you do bittul. You say, I don't want to own it, or you make a transaction. You make a transaction with a non-Jew. You are saying, I don't want this chametz on Pesach. You're doing an act like that to ensure it. That counts as the mitzvah of tashbisu. So the mechirat chametz, rather than playing a game, you're actually doing a mitzvah. But more importantly, when I tell people to do it, and I guide people on this law, I'm saying to them also that they are truly, truly recognizing the strength of Torah. Now, there are people who try to be careful not to actually not actually include real chametz in their transaction. Other people say you clearly have to include real chametz in the transaction. Otherwise, what's the point of the mitzvah? I mean, it's chametz you're not allowed to own on Pesach. But the fact is, these are all issues in terms of personal stringencies, whatever. But in terms of the law, when you do mechirat chametz, when you go through the process of appointing your rabbi to sell their chametz, you are doing a mitzvah. And you are really understanding what Torah is about as a legal system that guides us, the Jewish people.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
My question is this. There are many things that are not chametz that are forbidden on Pesach.
Yes.
Are we expected to sell those things? For instance, pots that we use to cook chametz in.
We actually cannot. We actually do not sell things that can be that would need toiveling. See, when we buy something from a non-Jew, we have to toivel it, a metal pot, a glass over, so forth. So if we sell it to the non-Jew, we would have to toivel it again when we purchase it. Therefore, we specifically do not include pots of that nature to a non-Jew, but we include the chametz that's in the pots. So therefore, we're very careful about including the chametz that's in the pots, but not the real, but not the pots themselves, but the chametz that's in the pots. In terms of other things such as kitnias, you have cornflakes or corn. Well, the fact is that even you have corn which is still shouldn't be eaten by Ashkenazim or Pesach, or rice or things of that nature. When the fact is that we really, most people put them with the chametz that they will sell to the non-Jew, but in actuality, um, the transaction says chametz. It doesn't say other things that are chametz. And the truth is, there is nothing wrong with a Jew owning corn on Pesach, because its only prohibition is only on owning actual chametz. Kidneys can be used, can be not only owned on Pesach. Kidneys can be used. I'm not going to get into halacha shaila, but if you have to take kidneys for a medical reason, then there's a lot of argument to say that is permitted, because that gets into issues of whether it's actually eating or whatever. But the fact is, it gets into issues of using it, and kidneys can be used. Corn products, for example, can be used. Any other questions?
Thank you.